the point of today is to talk about content and creating content in advance, how I do that, how I do it quickly, and how I do it in a way that connects to my audience. I feel like this is one of those topics where like I feel like I've talked about it a million times, but I've also been getting asked about this quite a bit lately. So I feel like that's always a sign to lean into it. So here we are. We're going to talk about content and all the things related to it. If you're here and you have questions about it, feel free to let me know. Happy to answer anything specific that you guys want to hear about this too. I'm just going to kind of like riff on what's been true for me around this and how it works really well in my business. But again, always happy to answer your questions. The whole point of me being here and doing this. So this actually was really an answer to a few questions I've been getting. And so again, if you have questions while you're here, let me know and we'll dive in. So, okay, where to begin? Let's first talk about how to write content fast. So personally for me, I think the thing that trips people up the most, and obviously I feel like this is like one of those things people feel kind of strongly about one way or another. But for me, I think what trips people up the most is not planning in advance. Like one of the things I always say is like, I've never been inspired sitting at my computer kind of thing. And so when you're putting yourself in a position to not plan in advance and then kind of expecting content to flow out of you on demand while staring at a computer screen, I think that's where people get the most stuck in content creation. They're like, okay, I'm going to create content. Let me sit down and do it. And then they're like, frozen, right? And that makes sense. Like I get why you would feel frozen in that scenario because you are not like going to get really excited about something and just produce on a moment's notice sort of thing. So having content planned in advance for me is what helps me feel inspired. It's what helps me cultivate my inspiration. It's what helps me actually feel really ready when I sit down to write. So one of the things I do really, really religiously is like know my topic in advance. So even these live streams, I plan them out well in advance. Like I probably have all of November and maybe even a couple into December. Like the topic is already planned. Does that make sense? And so I'm not like, oh, I'm going to go live today. Oh my God, what am I going to say? What am I going to say? I have known that I was talking about content planning today for over a week. I mean, technically I've known it for even longer than that, but I mean, in terms of like it being the thing in my brain, like my next live stream will be on content planning. So it doesn't mean that I've put like hours of thought into this necessarily, but it does mean that like I knew this was the topic. So if I had an idea about it, or I had a thought about it, or someone asked me something about it or whatever, I was like, oh yeah, I'm talking about content planning this week. Oh yeah, that's the topic I'm going to talk about in my Facebook group, all that kind of stuff, right? Does that make sense? And so it really makes it so much easier when you pre-plan to actually be excited and inspired and finding connection points all the time as it relates to what you're about to create. So then when you get on, it's so much easier. So I've maybe had, 7 different conversations around content this week that I wouldn't have otherwise made that connection around. But when I knew this was coming, it was like, oh yeah, I want to make sure I say that because I'm doing a live stream on that, right? So it's not like the anti-inspiration. It's like actually what cultivates your inspiration. So I feel like there's almost like two camps, which is like right off of inspiration or plan. And for me, it's like the only way I like foster a lot of inspiration is to plan. So again, meaning like those conversations I had this week on content, like I wouldn't have found them so inspiring had I not had this topic planned. I wouldn't have been making so many of those connections had I not known this. Does that make sense? Let me know. Are you more of the plan mentality or are you more of the inspiration mentality? Hopefully by the end of this, we can bring those two together. But I'm curious if you're watching, tell me which one you kind of lean more towards. I always think it's like so interesting to just sort of like see where people fall. And obviously either is fine, but for me, when you can fall in the middle, right, is when your business success really starts to take off because you're able to be super consistent with your content, but it also feels like an exciting, inspired thing. And I think that's what we're really looking for, right? We want to be consistent because we know that's what creates results in our business, but we also want it to energetically feel good and inspired and quick to produce. And so for me, blending those two is where that comes in, right? So I was able to, again, be inspired on this topic all week versus, right, sit down to be like, what am I going to go live on? Where's my inspiration? Like that is so stressful to me. It's not worth it. And that's when you typically don't like show up for a lot of the things. That's when you're like, oh, fuck it, I just won't go live today, right? When you're like, oh, I've thought about this in advance. I've known this for a month. I've been getting inspired on it in different ways. You're totally going to go live because you're excited about what you're going to talk about. You've already thought about it. You already have things in mind. You're already locked in on like, oh, I can't wait to talk about this, or I can't wait to tell them this, right? So it makes it so freaking easy to show up versus there's so many excuses of why you shouldn't bother. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. So that's one of the things that I use as an example for this live, but this also applies to how I write really fast too, is that I know the topic in advance and I work really hard to get inspired around it. So sorry, I don't know if you guys can hear my dog. She hears our other dog out there getting a treat and she's like, there's fine. So this helps me write really fast too, because if I know the topic that I'm going to write about that week or whatever is, content, let's say even, I'm thinking about that in advance. I'm filtering that through conversations I'm having, through things I'm listening to, through things I'm reading. Like I'm literally creating a container for my inspiration. So by the time I sit down, much of my content has already like written itself and solidified itself in my brain. Where I think people get so tripped up is they put no advanced thought into it. And then, yes, it does take a lot to write because you're ideating the whole time versus having done a lot of that work and then sitting down to put pen to paper, right? So, hey, Ramona, thank you for being here. Thank you for saying hi. I love it when you're on here and you're like, anyone there? Is anyone listening? So I appreciate you saying hi. Thank you for being here. So yeah, like this is what makes it simpler to write fast. When you haven't fully processed an idea and then you're sitting down to write it, you're not actually just sitting down to write. You're sitting down to ideate, get inspiration, and fully process it. So if you can do those things in advance, guess what? Things get faster, things get easier. It's so simple to write quick content. If you're not doing those things in advance, then the time it's going to take to actually produce it once you're sitting down in front of your computer is really, really significant, honestly, because all of those pieces now have to fall into place, right? So if you can use these containers in advance to get inspiration, you're going to find a ton of things that you're inspired around. If you're not doing that and the inspiration feels totally random, then yeah, when you get to sit down at your computer, there's a lot of ideation that's going to have to go into it. There's a lot of thought that's going to have to go into it. So creating it in advance is so valuable. It's sort of like, how people talk about like when you decide you want a certain kind of car, then you see that car everywhere. That's what happens for me when I pre-plan my content. When I decide on an idea, then I typically see inspiration around that idea everywhere. So it just gets really fast and simple because I've thought about that. I also keep a notes tab open on my phone to write those down when they happen. So say I just got off a client call and I was like, oh yeah, I really want to make sure to talk about on my live stream how I always plan my topics in advance because that was so relevant here. I would just make a quick note of that and move on. So again, by the time I sit down to write content, most of it's already fleshed out. Most of the ideas are already there. By the time I, think about this live stream, most of it's already fleshed out. Most of the ideas are there. Does that make sense? So you're really taking charge of your inspiration and you're trying to find that inspiration in your environment, experiences, and all of that, so that by the time you're sitting down to write, it's already there. This is also how you connect more with your audience because it's through that lens of it's already there and it's gained through being in Facebook groups, through talking to people, through being on client calls, all of that stuff. So it's way more connected than I'm a blank slate sitting down at my computer trying to process all of this, right? Hi, Sherry. Sherry says, what's your process for pre-planning and outlining topics in advance? Cool. I will totally speak to that. So yeah, like this is what's going to speed up your process. This is what's going to make it easier, is to have that container. Hi, Eleanor. Eleanor says, I love to plan out themes for the month, and then I get specific ideas and inspiration around it. Yes. Oh no, Tristan, I know the time change is screwing with me a little bit too. I actually really prefer fall time change over spring though. I'm curious what you guys think. Do you like fall better or spring better? I hate spring forward. I love fall back. Like I love for it to be light early in the morning, and I love for it to get dark earlier, but I feel like I'm kind of the outlier, not the norm. Does that make sense? I freaking hate when it's dark in the morning. Hate it. Like such a thing for me. Anyway, I digress. Tell me if you like spring forward or fall back better though. I'm curious. Okay, so Sherry, in terms of process for pre-planning and outlining, like I basically just do the thing that I've done for the last 5 years, which I'm sure you guys have heard about. I know you have the content bundle, Sherry, but it's basically like I create 5 main categories and then I write themes under those categories. And so I know what my theme is for the week coming up always. I mean, technically you would know for at least 15 weeks. If you doubled that, you would know for 6 months kind of thing. And so I'll just know like, okay, like I'll plan all that out at once. Like, what are my themes? What are my categories? What are my themes underneath that? So you'll know like the 3 months at once. Like that would be like one sit down planning thing. And then everything after that is just like, oh, okay, what's my theme next week? And then how do I start thinking about it? Okay, what's my live stream topic next week? And how do I just have that in the back of my mind? So like, just as like a little side note, I'm just looking at this so I can tell you, like I'll say on a little notes doc in my computer, I'll say like Monday live weekly topics. So I'll know what my Monday live is on. I'll know what my weekly topic is on. So just makes it super simple for me. Tristan says he's team no more time changes ever. I hear you. Actually, I do hear you on that. Yeah, that's true, Alan. That's probably why I like it, because fall back is more asleep. Sherry says, I don't even understand why daylight savings time is still a thing in the US. I think that's actually true. Oh, Drew likes spring forward better. It's so funny. I feel like most people like spring forward, but I feel like actually to Tristan and Sherry's point, I feel like most people are like, just fucking stop doing that. It is kind of funny though. Okay, so I pre-plan. I literally put it on a notes doc on my computer, and then I just like put notes around that and let my brain, play with that all week. It's also, and this is sort of like a mindset hack too, it gives your brain something to chew on. So something I'm like always telling my clients is like, you have to be in control of what your brain's thinking about, like give your brain the right things to think about. And so I feel like that's one way, like one mindset hack where I just give my brain the right thing to think about. Like, oh, think about what we're going to say on our content live. Cool. And my brain's like, sure. Yeah. Okay. Let me think about that. Versus like it going off on its own and thinking about all this crazy shit that I like don't want it to be thinking about. Like, what are 15 ways we should change the business? No. Brain, please think about what we should talk about on our content live this week. Brain, please think about our topic or our theme for the week. What do we have to say about that? Like it's super silly, but it really does help to give you thought containers and things to chew on, right? So not only is your content writing itself, but you're thinking about really helpful things versus, again, thinking about like all these things you should change or these 52 other courses you should enroll in or whatever. It's like, nope, we're gonna stay really locked in on paying attention to our content topic this week. And it really helps significantly. And again, then the notes are there. The ideas have already come forth. You're cultivating the inspiration and you're staying in charge of that versus, again, waiting for it. I think that that's where people get really stuck sometimes, is they're literally waiting for the inspiration instead of being in charge of cultivating it. They're like, well, I can't write until I'm inspired. And for me, I'm like, well, I create inspiration so I can write. So one of the ways I create inspiration is by having that, is by thinking about that during the week, is by like running that through different conversations I'm having and different things clients are saying and asking, right? Okay, cool. Then the other thing I do, and this is really helpful as well, is I try to think about content through different lenses. So obviously I have the categories and themes. If you don't know what I'm talking about, categories are like broad topics in your business. Themes are like the specific weekly themes underneath that. If you've done content planning party, you know what I mean. But I also try to look at things through lenses. So let's just say my like theme this week is like how to write content really quickly. I would try to look at that through lenses as well. So the lenses being something like, you know, what's my story around that? So I tell you like, here's my story around how I use, how I write content really fast in my business. And I would want to tell you a client story. Like, here's how clients implemented this. I might want to give you a tip on it. Like, hey, use a notes section and create notes there. I might want to give you like a tool around it. Like, oh, I plan it out in Trello, right? Then I might want to give you a challenge around it. Like, I challenge you to do that this week. Like, create a notes document in your computer, brain dump there, and then, you know, see how much easier and how much faster it is to write content, right? So it really helps to have lenses. So I was saying like my story, client story, tip, tool, challenge. Challenge being like, i.e., I challenge you to go do this thing. So if I know my theme and then I even know those lenses, it is impossible not to write and not to feel clear on what I'm writing too. And what's also helpful there is that it again becomes a mindset tool, because then when I'm still going, but I still don't know how to write, I still don't know what to say. That's what so many of us do. I still don't know what to say. Well, actually I do. I know my category, I know my theme, and I know the lenses. So if I still feel like I don't know what to say, I have some mindset stuff to look at here, right? And so it's so helpful, because where people get so stuck on content is thinking all of these thoughts around it that are just stories. I don't know what to say. I really have no idea. And they'll keep telling themselves that over and over. And so the reason I like having the categories, themes, and lenses is because it removes all of that I don't know what to say and helps you see, is that really true? And how does it work once I cultivate the inspiration and once I have all of these pre-planned specifics? Or do I have some mindset shit going on? Am I just really freaked out about getting visible? Am I really scared to talk about this one particular topic? Am I worried that someone's not going to think I'm an expert? Blah, 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 right? But when you have it this drilled down, it removes the ability to stay in that stuck point of like, but I don't know what to say. Like, I actually know exactly what my theme is. I know exactly what I'm talking about this week. I know that I want to share my story on it. I know I want to share a client story on it. I know, like, that's when it really flows, and it happens fast too. It also helps so that you're touching on all the points you want to touch on. Like, you're sharing pieces of you, you're sharing client stuff, you're giving value with tips, you're challenging your audience to do something. So it really helps you create a well-rounded content plan that can resonate and hit people in different ways at different times. Like, your story might be really impactful to someone one week, where your tip might help them a ton the next. And so it really helps you to kind of be this like well-rounded content creator. But more than that, it helps you to feel clear on what you're saying, right? Sherry says, I love that. LOL at 15 ways to change the business. Nope, exactly. It's like, it's too tempting. We need things to think about, right? So this really helps you so that you're in this place where you don't have the kind of like excuse, so to speak. Now, it doesn't mean you still don't have to cultivate that inspiration. You do, certainly, right? Like, you have to think about it in advance. You have to get excited about it. You have to take the time to put thought behind it, put energy behind it, all of that. Yes, right? But it helps you remove all of the stories around it. And again, this is how I just do it fast, because I'm not like, oh, but what do I have to say? I'm like, what's my story? Oh, yeah, cool. What's the client thing? Oh, yeah, I already wrote a note on that because we talked about it this week. Oh my God, what's the tip? Oh, yeah, I already put a note on that too because I gave that tip to so-and-so. Like, this is how it can get so fast. You plan it in advance, you know the topic, you create the notes, you ideate on it, and then you run with it through the lenses, right? And I know that that can kind of seem like a lot of steps, but it's actually so much easier because you're walking it out over a period of time versus just the one step of like, and now I'll sit down to write. Like, that's when we go blank, right? Do you see what I mean? Like, yeah, it might seem simpler, but we're expecting so much from ourselves. So one thing I always talk about too, which is really relevant to this, I share this with the women in my Millionaire Maker Mastermind all the time, which is like, in order to be a thought leader, you need to have time to think. So this is just cultivating those little pockets of time to think about the things that you want to be a thought leader around versus trying to be this like ultimate thought leader by sitting down and staring at a blank cursor on your computer. Not going to happen, right? If you can be really intentional about the things you want to get inspired around, it happens a lot more. Where I see people almost get tripped up is they feel like that's fake or not. Like it's not real inspiration or something like that. And I think that's just so detrimental in a way to not feel like you can channel your own inspiration or to not decide what you want to get inspired around. Like, I think when we're like, inspiration only counts as inspiration if I put no forethought into it, I put no energy into it, I put no effort into it, I think we're totally missing the point. That's almost when people are like, you know, like manifestation doesn't count if I put a lot like of effort into it. Like, what? No, like that's not it. Something I really like, I think Brooke Castillo from the Life Coach School said this, and she basically said like the fastest way to manifest something is to buy it. And I love that because it's like for so many of us, we're like, oh, the fastest way to like manifest something is like, it wouldn't even count if I bought it. It would have to like show up at my door as an unexpected surprise or something. And so I think this is true. Like the fastest way to get inspired is to cultivate your own inspiration. If we make that wrong, if we feel like it's fake or not real, if it has a container around it, or if I put effort into it, that's when we're going to stick ourselves. Do you know what I mean? Because then it's like we're at the mercy of something else versus like it is our creation. Same with like the fastest way to manifest something is to buy it. Like I'm at the creation of it versus I must wait and it has to come to me and it has to be so unexpected and or else it doesn't count. Not true at all. Hi Jen, hi Stephanie, it's good to see you. Oh good, Eleanor says this is really helpful. I'm so happy to hear that, Eleanor. So good. Jen, are you a spring forward or fall backward person? I was asking everyone that, and since you just got here, I'm going to ask you that. I'm also going to take a sip of my hot chocolate. Oh my God, it's so good. It's like the first kind of cold day in Florida. It's lovely. Okay, so what else do I want to say about this? Yeah, it is not fake if you have to do things to cultivate your inspiration. I know almost no content creators that are constantly inspired. Like most content creators I know or thought leaders I know have to put effort behind it. And that's why it's good. And that's why it's valuable. And that's why we can feel their intent. We can feel that they're really trying to serve us versus like, it was kind of a random thought they had. And that's the only way that I'm going to enjoy it or that it counts. Right. Jen says fall back, Stephanie's spring forward. It's so funny. It's so interesting how different we all are on that. Right. I don't know why I find that interesting, but you know how I love like whatever feels good to you. So I'm always interested to see like, does this all feel different to people? It totally does. Okay. That's how you're going to write fast is if you put that time in, right? How you're going to write slow is if you sit down and expect all of this to happen at once, right? So another thing that happens when you use the lenses, right? So we're talking my story, client story, tip, tool, challenge, right? Is you start connecting in a new way because you're making sure to look at a theme through those different lenses. So that is also how I make content more connected because I'm really intentional about doing that. Where I feel like some people get stuck with content is like they're only writing to their story all the time because that's just a habit and they're on that track, which is good, but we're just missing a lot of the like value and like tips and tools and things like that. Or opposite, they're only writing to like tips and tools all the time, then we're missing so much of the connective value of storytelling and things like that. And so again, it's not like a fake thing, but it is a really intentional thing of like, if I want to deeply connect with my audience, then I'm going to make the effort to do this in different ways, kind of thing, right? So I would really take it like almost through the lens of like, just like if I was in a friendship or a relationship, it's not just when I'm like inspired to call that person or just when I'm like inspired to reach out, although that can be a good part of it. And we'll talk about that. But I'm going to intentionally do that. I'm going to intentionally make the effort to call that person, maybe even when I'm busy. I'm going to intentionally make the effort to reach out and check in on them and ask about XYZ, even if I would rather talk about myself or whatever, right? The same thing is true in content. Like, it is not bad if you have to be super intentional, if you have to be super structured so that you can get that connection, so you can get your message across, so you can get your point through. That's not fake. Everything takes effort and intention. Does that make sense? Hi, Christina. Oh, good to see you. You are never on Facebook. This is like such a special little surprise. Awesome. Okay. So what I also do, and this is important to say, is like, if you have something that is inspiring you and coming through you, that can be an add-on to all of this foundational stuff we're talking about here. So if I've created my content a week in advance, if I've like written this stuff out, if I've done my lenses, if I've done my like tip and tool and story and whatever, and then something's really inspiring me, great. That's a huge add-on. I think last week in here, I shared that that thing that was really inspiring me at that moment, which was, I was talking about how like we shouldn't be saying, we shouldn't be teaching girls never depend on a man. We should be saying, find a man you can depend on. That was just like an inspired thing that I wrote that morning. That was just feeling really on my heart and I was feeling really called to share. Great. That's amazing. That came through because I didn't feel all this pressure to create something because it was already done. Does that make sense? So the random inspiration can certainly be part of your content plan too. And it can be these beautiful add-ins when it feels good and right and true and appropriate. And it's nice not to feel the pressure for it all the time too. It's nice to know that things are set, that you have a plan, that you have a structure, that you're cultivating your own inspiration. So if it doesn't randomly show up, that's okay. And if it does, that's just icing on an already baked cake. You know what I mean? That's so important. I do feel privileged. Thank you. So that is where it can intersect too, right? Like when we're not making it all one way or the other, like I have to feel inspired every day, or, right, I only use structure. I really think doing both is the key, right? Same with anything else in terms of content creation. Like say I had this topic planned for this live stream, but I was feeling super, super inspired on something else. Fine, I can totally do that. But knowing that I have it planned a month in advance is life-changing, so that yes, I can change my mind if I get super inspired around something, but I'm not like, oh, I hope I show up for that. I don't even know what I'm going to say that day, right? I love the idea of taking pressure off yourself. Totally. I think that's so important, Eleanor. Sherry says, I'd love to hear more about what pieces of the content creation process you did earlier on in your business and what piece you still do today versus get support with or delegate to your team. So, Sherry, basically at the beginning, I wrote daily content every week. So I would always write it on Sundays. And that was kind of like my process, exactly what we just talked about. Like I would know my theme, I would write to the lenses, I would write in advance, all of that kind of stuff. Now I repurpose a lot of that. So I still review that every Sunday, but a lot of it is also stuff that we're repurposing. I add on like pieces as I feel inspired. You guys are probably seeing me do like a lot more little quote things right now. I like went on a rampage with that when I was had my breast implant removal surgery and like wasn't able to do other things. So I was like on that train. And so my team just added that in. But otherwise, like they have a ton of content from me from years of writing that we can repurpose now. Like what I'm super committed to is doing this live stream every week, recording literally every week, recording happy thoughts every week. And think higher level things like writing client files once a month and doing the waitlist Q&A. So a lot of our like standard content is stuff that I've like gotten really inspired around, or that I've, written for years at this point, and that we're repurposing. So I still review that every week and I still have my hands in that every week, but in terms of like pulling it and stuff like that, totally team, but I still am knowing what our theme is that week. I'm still inspired around that. I'm still adding to that when I go review it to Repurpose. Does that make sense? It's just a little bit faster because the framework is already there. So that's how repurposing can get really, really, really useful for you too. And that inspires me a lot when I go back to repurpose content. I'm like, oh my God, why am I not talking about this more? Let me make that a live stream. Let me make that a bonus episode of literally. Let me talk about that on Happy Thoughts, whatever. And so it all starts to work together to inspire you and make things faster and faster and faster. So that's why it really becomes this ultimate collateral in your business, because it's facilitating your inspiration all the time. Like I'm so inspired when I go back to old content as well. So I think that's really useful. And again, like not treating inspiration as this thing that has to come down from the sky in the middle of the day, but really treating it as a thing I can look at and cultivate. Like I'm going to be inspired when I go back to old content. I'm going to be inspired when I know my topic. I'm going to be inspired when I just got off a client call where we talked about that. Does that make sense? The other thing that I do, and I think this is pretty relevant, but if you guys follow me on Instagram, 3 days a week on Instagram, I do a client lesson there. And so for that, I just write them down every day. Every single day, I have a notes document on my computer open, and every single day I write down client lessons after our calls, right? So it is inspired by a client call, and I'm putting structure around it, and I'm making sure to write it down, and I'm doing it in advance, and I'm making sure it's like saved and held somewhere. And I think that's what's really important. Sometimes it feels so all or nothing for people. It's almost like, oh, I'm so inspired about this thing that I just talked to my client around. I have to go do something on it right now. No, I'm so inspired around this thing I just talked to my client about. I'm gonna put it on a notes doc. And then when it's time for me to do client lessons, I'm going to grab that. I'm so inspired about this thing that I just talked to my client about. Let me put it on my content doc, and then I'll come back to it. Like, you don't have to like run at it at that moment, right? So that's a piece too, is being able to like capture that inspiration when it comes in, but not feeling like you have to act on it that second or it's gone. I think that that's super, super valuable to just like have that waiting for you to go back to without having to almost make it like this kind of like push pull sprint thing. Like, oh my God, if I just got this idea, I have to write something on it like right now. Like, it really has been a discipline for me over time in business to not feel like I have to do that immediately or write to every idea or whatever. I'm kind of believing that they're always coming and that they're always living somewhere, if that makes sense, right? So the more I do that every day and write down the client lesson, the more I'm like, oh, this is like endless. Like this document is so long. Like there's always inspiration to be had here. I'm not like, oh, let me grasp onto it when it comes. I'm more like, I know how to cultivate this. So there's spaciousness for me around it. There's less pressure around it. There are plenty of ideas here. So I hope that makes sense, that pre-planning, but that cultivating, like, what do I do with the inspiration when it comes and where do I put it? And it's something so simple, right? It's like literally just the notes doc in my computer, but it makes all the difference to feel that tension of both. I'm pre-planned and I can work off of inspiration and having those fit together, whether it's for weekly content, whether it's for a client lesson, whatever it is, like those two living together serves me so much. And on the topic of team, which Sherry was asking about, it also serves my team. My team knows, at least a month in advance what live stream topics I'm doing. So they can make graphics in advance. They know a month in advance, like what the email title should be for that week, stuff like that, right? So it really helps them support me in getting more content out too by being planful around it. Instead of like it being like that morning, I'm trying to think of something and then I'm trying to message them as quickly as possible. I'm trying to get them to give me a fast turnaround, whatever. Like that feels more stressful than inspired most of the time, right? So that's also something to think about too, is the more you can be in charge of planning in advance and cultivating your own inspiration, the more your team can hold you in that, whether that's creating the graphics for you or getting the email set up or pulling the content for repurposing that week or whatever. They can really support that process for you if you let yourself be disciplined on what it's going to be in advance, right? So for me, that's like kind of how I can create so much content each week and how I can show up for it, because it's not fly by the seat of my pants kind of thing. It's like they know a month in advance, here are our live topics. They know like every week what day podcast is getting recorded and what that looks like. So that's something to think about as well, is like, not only does that help you long-term to write faster, be more inspired, it helps them to fully support that and helps you connect with your audience in that way too, right? Like if you guys know in advance what I'm doing my live stream on, you're more likely to feel connected to it and want to come, right? Versus like if it's random and you didn't really know what it was going to be on and you didn't have an email waiting for you because we couldn't get that together by the time I thought of the idea, like it would be much harder to connect so frequently. But because they can set up the email in advance, we know the topic in advance, we can post about it in advance, that kind of thing. It makes it so much easier for us, i.e. me and you guys, to connect, because it gives you a reason to want to be here. It gives you an email reminder, it gives you a post reminder, all that kind of stuff. So you can start making that content work for you, and you can also use your team to help you connect more, right? Tristan says, what about if you're the type who has their content ideas across 14 different notes applications? Yes, you need an intervention. OneNote. Even like, I try to like, and maybe this was helpful, maybe it's not, but I try to like create containers. So I have a client lessons note, I have a content note, and I have a live stream note. So that helps me like be clear about where those are going when I have the idea, versus having to go back later and being like, what did I mean by that? I'm like, oh, it was a client lesson on whatever, content planning. Cool. I remember that. I'll even put in parentheses like convo with Jen or whatever to jog my own memory. Or like, if I know, oh, that would be like a really good in-depth live stream training, I'm going to put on the live stream note. If I know like, oh, I really want some weekly content around that, I'm going to put on the content note. So I'm not sure if that's helpful, but like one platform and then different notes based on what you think it would be most useful for has helped me a ton, so that when I have the idea and inspiration, I'm being as clear as possible about like what I'm saying for it versus like random idea. And then I have places where all those go. So I have like the place I pull client lessons from. I have the content plan that we follow. So I would eventually go add that idea in to be part of the themes or categories. And I have the live stream document that I share with teams so they know in advance what I'm doing. So then I would go add it there as well. So I have like the idea section, and then I have the like we're doing it section. So I don't know like how easy or how much that resonates based on your process, but that's something I would think about too, is like the more you can create like really specific containers for those, the easier it is to facilitate those ideas through. And the more they don't have to live in your head. So that's another thing that I find really helpful about that, is I think that sometimes when it's all living in our head, we feel this urgency around it. It's like I was saying, we're like, I just had this great conversation with the client, I have to go do something with it right away. It like creates like urgency, because you're like, I will lose this idea, it's going to go away, versus like, I will not lose this idea, it's on my client lessons document. And I even reminded myself what the conversation was, so we're good, right? Now, it doesn't mean I never have ever lost an idea or get back to one and be like, oh, I don't even really like that lesson anymore. Like, I can't really remember exactly what it was after there. Fine. But as long as I'm doing that really consistently, it doesn't matter if some come and go, like there's an abundance there, right? Versus like if I'm trying to remember it, it feels like this constant tape playing and I'm so worried I'm going to lose something. It's sort of like the difference between like trying to memorize your grocery list or just making it, you know what I mean? So that's sort of how I see that. But yeah, I would definitely say like that discipline of like, there's one place it goes, there's one idea bank for a certain thing, and like really sticking to that, I think is super, super helpful. I'm not going to say there are 6,700 notes in my notes app, but I'm not going to say, right, totally. But for that, like, just don't make separate notes, if that makes sense, right? Like have the one note app where you're making all the client lesson notes, or that, again, that's my example, but do you know what I'm saying? Like I will purposely not create more notes for client lessons. There's like one client lesson. So anyway, that's just something to play with, where it's not like, oh, a new note for each one, because I'm not going to find them. It's like one note for this particular thing. Does that make sense? I know it's easier said than done, but anyway, I think that that's super helpful. Also, I have like anxiety thinking about you having 6,700 notes. I feel like I'm such like a, one of my friends is like, she can have like whatever, like 5,000 text messages sitting there and it's like fine for her. And I'm like, no, I cannot. So anyway, this might just be a preference thing, but having one does help quite a bit. So, okay, let me just like review a little bit. But so pre-plan, cultivate inspiration about what you have pre-planned, i.e. like you're creating that container and getting inspired around it versus waiting for random inspiration. Play with lenses, like, you know, mine were client story, personal story, tip, tool, challenge. Like those are just mine as an example. They're not like the right ones. They're just like easy for me. So like you can play with what you might want your lenses to be. You can use mine. It doesn't matter, but having those is really, really helpful. It also shows you if you have mindset gaps there. And then use all of that to think about content multiple times before you even sit down to write it. So by the time you're sitting down to write it, it comes really fast. And you're more likely to create connected content because it's coming from ideas and inspiration through your interaction, through being in groups or on social or with your clients or whatever, right? And let your team help you, which also helps you connect more. Like, again, if we can tell you in advance what I'm going to do for a live stream, we can get that email set up, that kind of stuff. That's going to help you not only get things done really efficiently, but have that connection facilitated even more with your audience. Yeah, Sherry, exactly. He just needs one 6,000 page note. I think that's the best idea. Problem solved, Tristan. We just fixed it all for you. You're so welcome. Just combine them all. It'll be fine. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Like, I think that it certainly like takes that effort to put into it, but I also find that it's what creates that consistency, and obviously that consistency is what creates consistent sales in your business. So though it can seem like, oh my gosh, like now I have to plan it and I have to think about it and I have to ideate around it and then I have to write it and then I have to what, it really is so much easier. And it really is what helps you be consistent, because again, where the consistency falls off is like, if that day I'm like, what am I going to go live around? And then I end up just not doing it. And I didn't pre-commit to a team, so they aren't getting anything out anyway. And so I can like, right? That's where consistency gets uneven. So this is what helps you really create that container, that consistency for you. It helps you write faster and it helps you connect more. So that's pretty much it. Hope that helps. I always happy to answer content questions. So you guys let me know if you have any. Tristan's going to create his 6,000 page document. We're all good here. So let me know if you guys are watching the replay and if you have any questions I can answer for you. If you want to learn more about like how we, like the process we use to plan the categories and themes and then to repurpose, we have a content bundle that I made with my COO, and she walks you through the whole repurposing process. So you can grab that. I think it's a little life.com/content bundle, but I will double check and I'll drop the link after. That's all I got, guys. I hope you have a beautiful Monday. I know this is a very, very big week if you're here in the US, so make sure you vote, and I'm sending you guys all the love, and I hope that you have a really good week. All right, bye y'all.